This is Melrose in the Scottish borders, and behind me is Melrose Abbey, and it doesn't look too spooky. It's quite something, even surrounded by safety fencing while it's getting tarted up a bit. It was the first Cistercian monastery in Scotland, and it was founded by David I in 1137. He invited the monks to come from Braveheart Abbey in Yorkshire, and at its height it's thought around 100 of them lived here. It served a couple of purposes. First of all, it showed just how pious the king was, but secondly, and maybe more importantly, it dominated the landscape and showed how much power he had over what was a contested area. The border has moved around a bit over the years, and this area dealt with the fallout from every advancing and retreating army from both sides. The people who lived here were more loyal to their families than any king or queen. Check out my video on the Border Reivers and the Cursing Stone if you want to know more about them. A lot of what you can see today with the red sandstone is actually from around 1385, when it was completely rebuilt after Richard II attacked and destroyed it. Melrose is actually thought to be the last resting place of the real Braveheart. Somewhere under here is a heart. We're not completely sure whose heart it is, but it's reputed to belong to Robert the Bruce, who was actually known as Braveheart before Mel Gibson nicked it for William Wallace. The rest of the Bruce was interred at Dunfermline Abbey, but after he died, his heart went off on a bit of a gap year. His right-hand man and BFF, James Douglas, known as the Black Douglas, took it with him in a box on a chain round his neck when he went off to fight in a crusade. So, somewhere under here is probably the real Braveheart. This guy here is a bagpipe playing pig. He's also a 3D printed model of a bagpipe playing pig up on the roof. It's a water spout, thought to have been made by a sculptor with a sense of humour. But you want to know about the vampire. Legend has it that sometime in the 12th century, a priest lived in the town. And he wasn't very priestly. In fact, he was a bit of an old sinner. Rather than tending to his flock, he preferred other distractions, probably the ones you're thinking of right now. And he liked to hunt with hounds. So much so, the locals nicknamed him the Hundeprest, the dog priest. When he died, one of his congregation, a patron, was a lady so influential that he was allowed to be buried here in the Abbey churchyard. But it's said that he'd lived such a life of sin that his soul couldn't rest, and that each night he would rise from the grave and roam the town. The monks protected the churchyard and kept him out of the abbey with prayers and fasting, but the locals weren't safe, and each night the Hundeprest would go on the hunt for blood. He would go to the house of his former benefactor and hover over her bedchamber, murmuring and groaning, which doesn't sound conducive to a good night's sleep. This went on for some time, and eventually the lady complained to a visiting friar. She told them they'd have to pray harder and lay off the pies just a bit more to get rid of the monster. And seeing as she'd been pretty generous to the abbey, the monk felt like he didn't have much choice. And so, one night, 4 brave monks armed themselves and stayed in the grounds of the abbey, waiting for the Hundeprest to rise. It got to midnight and nothing had happened. They were getting cold, so they agreed that 3 of them would go to a house to get warm. You can probably guess what happened next. It's a bit like when someone gets out of the car or goes into the woods or does anything alone in a horror film. The young monk was on his own, and the Hundeprest decided now was a good time to make an appearance. It was terrifying, as The Walking Dead probably would be. The monk froze, but then he remembered where he was and the fact he was alone. He didn't really have time or the option to be afraid. With an almighty roar, the Hundeprest charged in his direction, but as the creature got closer, the monk swung his axe and brought it down on the rotting head. The Hundeprest roared again, but retreated. The monk followed, compelling the priest to return to his grave forever. The other 3 monks heard the racket and rushed outside. They ran to the grave, just in time to see the creature retreat inside. They waited till dawn, then uncovered the grave. The Hundeprest lay inside, still dead, but still bleeding from an axe wound in the side of his head. They took the body and carried it outside the grounds of the abbey. Then they burned it till the ashes scattered to the wind. And that was the end of the Hundeprest, allegedly. The story was first recorded in 1197 by William of Newburgh, a monk and historian who was very interested in revenants. He said it would not be easy to believe that the corpses of the dead should sally, I know not by what agency, from their graves, and should wander about to the terror or destruction of the living, and again return to the tomb, which of its own accord spontaneously opened to receive them. Did not frequent examples occurring in our own times suffice to establish this fact, to the truth of which there is abundant testimony? Sounds like he had some interesting sources. The whole idea of revenants is thought to have been encouraged by clergymen around those times because it implied that if you didn't live a pious life, you wouldn't be able to rest in the hereafter. Convenient? Originally it's thought the Hundeprest was supposed to be a revenant, but like everything else, he morphed with the times and changing fashion. And by the time the story was told again in the 20th century, not long after the publication of Bram Stoker's Dracula, he'd evolved into a vampire. Just goes to show you, everything changes, even the undead. As for this place, well, it functioned as an abbey until the Protestant Reformation in 1560. The monks were allowed to stay on, but the last one died in 1590. Part of it was used as a parish church up until the 1800s, and now it's obviously a museum. I've never been here before, but given the fact that part of it's fenced off at the moment, I think I'm going to have to come back.